Hello and welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We're both property people running our own businesses, and this podcast is just us chatting, as we often do, about anything and everything property. So, Simon, we're just having a quick chat, and you've done a number of developments on PaTMa, and some of these I feel are sort of quite relevant to us as property investors. Well, they're obviously relevant to us as property investors, but
I hope they all are.
Yeah.
That is the objective of the software, mostly.
Otherwise, you've failed.
Yes, right.
But the one that particularly made my ears prick up was just around the one around monitoring prices and price review and tracking, because that's something I think, well, pretty sure all of us will be doing as property investors and landlords. So probably a good idea just to maybe talk about what it is first that you've done, and then we can just talk about how that relates to us as investors.
So one of the main things that PaTMa's property prospecting tool does is monitor online property listings. So all the main sites are covered: Rightmove, Zoopla, On the Market, and more recently a couple from Northern Ireland, I think, Property News and Property Pal. They focus in the Irish market. And Prime Location is covered as well. God, how can I forget that one? And you find properties that you're interested in. You can then save them to the system, and it will keep an eye on them and let you know when the price changes, or if it gets sold, or if it's been sold. It'll keep keeping an eye on it, so that if it comes back to the market, it'll also notify you of that as well. So it's very useful for just keeping track of properties that you're interested in, that you found on these various portals. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've been working on and gradually putting out into the world a new facility around that, which lets you actually search these online property listings in ways that the portals often don't let you do directly. So if you wanted to find properties that have had prices reduced, or that have been on the market for a long time, or I think one of the most interesting ones is ones that have been relisted. So where I mentioned that they've left the market, so they've been marked as sold, or has happened with a lot of properties at the beginning of lockdown. They just got taken off. People just stopped listing them on Rightmove and other portals, because they sort of put a big pause on everything. So now when they've been relisted, they've come back onto the portals, and the software can show that they have been relisted. So right now, that's often because of this sort of big pause that agents and sellers put on their properties. But more traditionally, and looking over the longer term, those relistings often indicate where properties have fallen through. So a sale has started, and then for whatever reason, either the chain's fallen apart, or a problem's been found, or finance couldn't be worked out, or what have you. The property sale has fallen through, and the vendor has to relist it back on the market to try and find a new buyer. And often when that happens, they're now 3-ish months further down the line, having expected to have a buyer, and now find they don't have one anymore. So they're often a bit keener to actually find a sale, or find a buyer, so they can be good properties, I think, to investigate a bit more.
So just so I'm clear on that, so first of all, I think it's obviously a really, really good development, because one of the things I liked about Zoopla, I use Zoopla rarely, but because I'm not keen on the look and feel. But one of the things that you could do is always search on reduced price, which obviously you can't, or reduced percentage, which you can't do in Rightmove, for example. So that's obviously going to be a really useful benefit for all of us. The bit about the properties being taken off, so that's one thing I always sort of question with the extensions that we have. So if someone does take it off for 6 months and it brings it back on, would that still track it if they change agents?
No, it doesn't currently work across agents. So when properties get put onto the portals, generally speaking, they are given a unique identifier. by those portals. And if the same listing is put back up by the same agent, 9 times out of 10, I mean, that's a guess, but most of the time, that ID is maintained by the systems who are, or that are managing that synchronization process between the agent and the portal. So that can be picked up and detected as the same property coming back. As you quite rightly say, that doesn't work 100% of the time. If the vendor changes agent, then it's going to be a new listing. There are also other cases where the software involved doesn't always maintain that ID. So again, that continuity is broken. But it seems quite reliable. Most of the time it's consistent and it works. And I think most of the time, in the cases where a sale has fallen through, a vendor would typically just say to the agent, well, put it back on the market then. So I think that does work most of the time. There's a sort of the next step in this process, which I am wanting to work on, which is effort to detect the same property but under a different listing, and maintain or fill in the gaps of the continuity a bit more. But that's going to be a few more months away yet, I think.
Well, that sounds great. But the other thing I was going to say, that the point that you've also made is actually, because you're doing this and providing this data, and it's proactively providing data, should it be taken off and then re-provided with a new agent, we'd be more aware of it, because, if you're tracking it and that's been followed, if it does get taken off, we'd know about it. And then if it comes back on, assuming we're still in the market, no doubt we'd be able to tie those two things together ourselves anyway, because of the information you've provided.
Yeah, indeed. If when you add a human back into the loop, with the extra data and with keeping an eye on these things, then yes, you can spot those things a lot more easily.
Sounds very good.
Thank you. I hope it is. It's as I said, it's just in very early days of that search system at the moment. So I've not been shouting about it very much in very many places. So just a few people have been hearing about it, and now, of course, the hundreds who listen to this podcast will know. So it'll be interesting to see the sort of feedback I get from that. And
on these price tracking services, just more generally speaking, are they also looking at, so they're looking at asking prices? Can they aggregate that up? I guess I'm just thinking now about the trends of price, and there's a lot of us are, as we come out of lockdown, is thinking about what's going to happen with the property prices. Do we want to put offers in? Do we want to buy properties? Have we reached the nadir, or are we just starting to climb back up? And so I think there's, anything that can help us with that could be useful.
There are a couple more enhancements that are in the pipeline. Maybe might even be pretty close to release by the time this episode goes live, but probably not quite. Where you'll be able to search by estimated rent, estimated yield, and estimated return on investment. So that might help sort of answer that question a bit. But also within the details that are shown on each of these listing records are price history graphs for that specific postcode area, or that specific postcode and a couple of miles around it. And looking at the most recent data from that, it's actually really interesting. You can just about see the plummeting in the number of records being processed by the land registry in the COVID-19 period. And actually, it varies from area to area, but some of the areas I've been looking at, the average property sale price has actually gone up during that time, especially in the detached property category. My thinking around this is not so much that property prices have suddenly gone up in the last couple of months, but that the properties that are being sold at a higher price, or were being sold at a higher price, were perhaps the ones that continued. And those sales actually continued and went through because those people at the higher price bracket perhaps didn't have problems around financing and things like that. And the properties that are in the lower price brackets, they're the ones that will fell through or put on pause or what have you. Yeah. But it's interesting poking around in the data and seeing what you can find there.
Yeah, well, the logic there is sound, and yeah, likewise, I spent a lot of my life working with data and insights, so I love a little bit of analysis myself. So I'm a geek as well. But yeah, that does make sense. What you said, I was just thinking. Yeah, I mean, it's like most things at that sort of end. If we're talking about the detached properties and generally the sort of demographics of people that are buying those, they're probably less likely to be affected by the impacts of COVID, you'd think, generally speaking.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see what the next couple of months of data reveal, because unfortunately the property sale data that comes from the land registry always has a lag of 2 months ish. So yeah, it's a bit frustrating. You can't see right up to date information, but yeah, as it filters through, it'll be very interesting to see what those graphs show. I do like looking at a good graph. So.
Me too. Interestingly, I was reading about the number of searches now that are happening for rental properties, and the anecdotal evidence is the number of people, or what I've read in a bit of a headline saying that a lot of people are coming out of lockdown wanting to either change where they live for reasons previously mentioned. They want somewhere maybe more rural, or they want someone with a little outside space, or that the person they were living with is deemed no longer appropriate. So, and when you look at the figures, it's quite big. It's quite a steep curve actually upwards in terms of those now looking for places to rent. And the final thing that that is mentioned, and I think is is that a function of boredom as well. People just looking at running out of things to look at on the web. I know I'll have a look at other properties.
Yep, it's always a good way to exactly always a good way to while away the hours, isn't it? Bit of clicking through Rightmove and things. I'm not sure if I haven't seen them recently, but I know in the past Rightmove and other platforms as well actually have published sort of interesting properties, and yeah, there are some really really good ones. There's one that's it's got a really good address. I think it's number 1 the Thames, and it's I can't remember the right description for it, but it was a sort of turret type thing that was built in one of the wars, and it's only reachable at low tide, and it's just at the end of the Thames, obviously, and it's been on the market for a while, but that's always intrigued me, that kind of property. So I mean, it's quite a big property. It's made out of concrete and steel and stuff, but it needs some renovation.
Yeah, and the other thing, and my household is very similar, is that because of lockdown, obviously we've spent a lot of time in the places in which we live, and if you've not, it's like anything else. It's like sharing shining a glaring light on defects. Is all of a sudden you become more aware because you're spending nearly, if not all, of your time there, and if you are unhappy with it, then you're going to be more likely to want to come out of it at the end of this.
Yeah, I should say I wasn't looking at ex World War turrets in the middle of rivers as a way to escape my family. I was looking at this just because I'm curious about the properties.
Well, I was going to say, that's where I was going to finish up. So basically, with that rationale, what you're saying is, sounds like a good idea to me.
What kind of properties do you look at then? But when you're not looking for investment properties, when you're cruising for property porn, what's your ideal or dream property that you go looking for?
Sadly, I leave that to the wife, because I generally just look more for the business, and even when I'm telling myself not to, because I've set up all of the search areas and and the reminders, that's just what I look at. So even if I say, right, I'm not going to do any more investment into a student property, I'll get the email pop up. Oh, right, another 5. Oh, let's just have a quick look at that. Whereas, my wife does looking around, and we are thinking about, what we do in the future. So, so I guess I'm quite sad. I'm always looking for business. I rarely look for myself in that regard. Probably says something about me, that I'm not sure what.
Perhaps if I look at answering it myself, then, seeing as you have no real answer to that, which is quite disgraceful, I'm afraid, Stuart. When I'm not looking for properties that are just a bit quirky, actually, no, maybe I will talk a bit about quirky properties. So there's things in sort of at the end of rivers. There's things on remote islands where it's the only house, but it's a mansion or something, or in some cases it's a cottage, but it's the only property on islands. I mean, I'd never actually want to live in these places, but they're just such curious things to have ever been built and for people to have ever chosen to live in. It just intrigues me. But another one I really like is some of the old underground tunnels in London and other places. Sometimes they're bunkers in sort of places outside London, but mostly in London they're ex-tube lines or potential tube lines that were built again to use as shelters during the wars. But they're now kind of spare. And what could you do with these things? It's just intriguing. There's I think there are some that have been turned into underground farming, which I think is quite a novel idea. But I would love to be able to do something with some of those tunnels, just because they're such unique structures and properties to work with. I had no idea what I'd do with them, but be fantastic. I suspect they'd be quite pricey to maintain, which might be an issue. But
yes, it sounds like you need a bit of investment for some of those.
Yeah, probably. Although quite a lot of the underground tunnels are actually still pretty sturdy, and some of them have been quite well maintained anyway, just by the current sort of owners, whether that's the underground or some that are owned by I'm not sure if it's Royal Mail or the postal service elements of things as well. And of course, some of them have now been turned into museums and tourist attractions, so they're maintained through those avenues. Yeah, there are others that are still completely spare. So moving a bit away from the quirky properties, the other properties I always like looking at are sort of the castle-y type properties. I think I may have mentioned my obsession with castles on this podcast.
You have, yeah.
But yeah, I really dislike the idea of an old stone drafty castle for actually sort of practical living. I do like my creature comforts, but just from a building point of view, I think they're fascinating, and I love just looking at the photos. And I wonder if any of them will have virtual tours now. That'd be pretty cool if they do, where you can go and wander around these castles. And there's a whole bunch of them for sale. So right now, there are always some available for sale. So you can go and find these, and quite a lot are in Scotland, in sort of fairly remote places, but not all of them. And it's it's fascinating. If you just go to Rightmove and search for properties over sort of £5 million and exclude London, and you're bound to find a few.
That'll be why I've not seen them before. I've never clicked on that setting. Greater than 5 million. That's my mistake.
Yeah, not in your standard student investment search profile, that one.
Yeah, although saying that, every now and again I do have a look for the 7-figure properties, just because I'm thinking about what we could do on a bigger scale. But just on this topic, I do get intrigued by the more architecturally different, I would say, properties. They're the ones that tend to suck me in, and you just talking about bigger properties on their own reminded me that, if I see one that's, right on the coast, for example, that looks like it could, landslide at any given second. I still get intrigued by them and how they've been built. And yeah, so I think, and some properties that I really do like looking at are those ones, if you've got land that's on an outstanding natural beauty, and you can only get planning permission if it's going to be architecturally significant or something like that. Those properties do interest me because people you're also, the planning requirement is that you're building something that's going to be very different from the norm, might be much more closely aligned with the environment that it's in, that kind of thing. So those things do interest me. So I'm not a complete heathen in property, but it's just very rare, I think.
Yeah, speaking about sort of bits of land, there's one that went up for auction in Reigate recently. It's up on Reigate Hill. What's the name of the pub that's nearly at the top of
the Yew Tree?
That's the one. So it's just sort of behind there a bit. It was being auctioned by Southern Water, I think, something like that. So there's some bit of land they've owned for yonks, presumably. And it was listed in the auction catalogue at, I don't know, 10,000 or something. And it was, I don't know, maybe an acre of land. I can't remember exactly. So I thought, that's quite interesting. £10,000 for an acre garden that we can drive to easily. Do a bit better than our current postage stamp. So actually, this was an online auction because it's during the lockdown period. So I was able to watch the auction take place. And oh my goodness, it sold for nearly £50,000. Oh no, it wasn't. Maybe it was nearly 60,000. But anyway, way more than I would. I could afford to pay for an extended garden. But I have no idea what people are going to do with it up there, because again, there are sort of dotted buildings around, but I can't imagine you're going to get planning permission for anything very significant up there. So I'm not quite sure what people would do with that bit of land.
Yeah, I think they've obviously got a hope, but it's a bit like agricultural land, isn't it? There's usually not a lot you can do. But if I guess some people will have a hope if there are buildings around, which there are in that area, that they might get permission to do something. And I guess that's the risk to reward there.
Yeah, it got bid up so high because there were 4 or 5 people bidding on it. So there were obviously people who had plans and thought they could do something, and it wasn't just one of them, or even a couple of them. There's a few thought it would be worthwhile. So yeah, I'm going to have to try and keep an eye on that and see what actually happens to it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
This doesn't exist yet, and it probably won't by the time this episode goes live, but it will soon after. And that's another new feature of PaTMa, which is one where you can set an area or a postcode and a range, and ask it to monitor for planning applications that get created in that area. So I'll have to find out the postcode of the Yew Tree pub and set up a planning application monitor for around that period, for around that area. Sorry, so I can see what the purchasers of that land try to do with it.
Yeah, that'd be good to know.
I feel I've been talking randomly about my property obsessions for quite a lot of this episode.
Well, it's just us chatting. We do say it. We give the disclaimer at the start.
Indeed. I hope it hasn't been too boring for the listeners. We are nearly out of time, though, quite worryingly. Is there anything else you wanted to slip into this episode, Stuart?
No, I think we can leave it there.
Cool. Do you want to take us out then?
Yeah, so as always, if you are enjoying the show, and we hope you're enjoying these chats, please do let us know by leaving a rating or review on your podcast player of choice. And if you want to look at previous episodes and find out any more information on what we've talked about, just go to thebusinessofproperty.com.